Hello, thank you for joining us on another episode of Virtual Field Trips with Josh. We are going on a very fun field trip today, full of nature, which I love, to the Galapagos Islands. This is always brought to you by Center for Success, and also we always like to thank virtualfieldtrips.org for allowing us to use their content during this time at no cost to us. So let's go ahead and get started.
The Galapagos Islands, a daily challenge for survival. Join us as we take a trip to one of the most dramatic places on Earth, the Galapagos Islands. Get ready to see some extraordinary landscapes and exotic animals that you won't soon forget. So just where are the Galapagos Islands and what makes them so unique? They can be found 600 miles west of Ecuador, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Ecuador is also a country that has governing authority over the islands. Our adventure will begin in Ecuador's capital city of Quito, over 9,000 feet high in the Andes Mountains. Quito, along with the Galapagos Islands, is located almost right on the equator. From Quito, we fly out to the Galapagos Islands to begin exploring this treasure trove of biodiversity that has fascinated naturalists for centuries. They are unique in the world because they have been isolated for centuries, allowing nature to rule unspoiled by outside influence. Much of the island's flora and fauna can't be found anywhere else in the world. Almost all of the land reptiles are endemic, which means they exist only in that place or country. Specifically, of the 23 species of reptiles in the Galapagos, 21 are endemic and exist only here. Similarly, about 75% of land birds in the Galapagos are also unique to the islands. It is also a very harsh and barren landscape where existence does not come easily. Just how did the world come to discover the stunning array of wildlife on these islands? To answer that, we have to go back in time to 1535. On his way to Peru, Bishop Tomás de Berlanga's ship was blown off course and landed on the Galapagos Islands. He and his shipmates were the first to witness these enchanted isles, as they called them at the time. So what are these islands doing way out in the Pacific Ocean, 600 miles from anywhere? They were formed by volcanic action over the course of millions of years. In fact, the islands are actually a group of volcanoes. The volcanoes and the islands sit on a tectonic plate called the Nazca Plate. These plates are pieces of the Earth's outer shell. The theory of plate tectonics tells us that upheavals along their boundaries resulted in volcanic eruptions over millions of years. These eruptions created undersea mountains, which continued to grow wider and taller until they finally appeared above the water, becoming islands. Some of these volcanoes are still active, with more than 60 eruptions over the last 200 years. The Galapagos cover about 23,000 square miles, but just over 3,000 of these are on land. The other 20,000 square miles are made up of the ocean waters around the islands. Making up this archipelago are 13 major islands, 6 smaller islands, and many tiny islands. One of the older islands, San Cristobal, was formed about 2.5 million years ago. And that is where our Boeing 737 landed after its flight from Quito. Leaving the airport, we were driven to the harbor where we met our boat, and it wasn't long before we were seeing wildlife everywhere. We quickly noticed that the animals here were very tame and had never learned to be afraid of humans. We started out our trip scuba diving, and found that the abundance of sea life was astounding. Vast schools of jacks, hammerhead sharks, and dozens of other species seemed to fill the ocean wherever we looked. This incredible biomass of fish is made possible by the currents flowing through the islands every day. Even though the islands are in tropical water on the equator, the ocean surrounding the Galapagos is relatively cool. This cold water comes from the Humboldt's Current, a strong ocean flow that starts in Antarctica and continues north along the Pacific coast of South America. It seems a bit ironic that even though the islands are on the equator, the waters surrounding them came from the Antarctic. Carried in with these currents is nutrient-rich water, which can feed a multitude of fish. The result is an abundance of marine life, including countless varieties of fish and sea vegetation. Suddenly, as we were diving one morning, a huge shadow loomed overhead. We thought at first it was a boat, but then we saw the fins. It was a whale shark. Even though they are the size of a school bus, whale sharks are gentle giants that sift plankton and small fish from the water, much like a baleen whale. They are also the largest fish in the world. After our scuba diving adventure, we made our way to the island of Santa Cruz, the main island visited by tourists. One of the highlights of our visit to Santa Cruz is the time we spent at the Charles Darwin Research Station. He was one of the first scientists to visit the Galapagos Islands and is also the most famous. Back in 1831, 20-year-old Charles Darwin left England to join the ship called the HMS Beagle as their onboard naturalist. His goal was to collect new and unknown plants and animals from around the world. Over 5 years, he collected thousands of examples. One of the stops on this monumental journey was the Galapagos Islands. Once here, his thoughts became occupied with such questions as to how the animals got there in the first place, why they look and behave the way they do, and how they survive on such a barren landscape. Several years later, after pondering the answers to these questions, he published his famous book titled On the Origin of Species. This book led to new scientific theories being considered about the topics of evolution and adaptation. His ideas still remain as one of the ways in which people view the natural world. Darwin's thoughts were first inspired by the differing beaks of the finches he observed on each of the islands. He observed that each bird's beak was suited to its own diet and environment. Then he began to wonder if all the birds had changed over time from one historical finch species into these several species. Here we can see how cactus finches have beaks shaped for eating from cactus plants. Ground finches have short, thick beaks. These help them eat seeds from the ground. A subspecies of ground finch is nicknamed the vampire finch. It earned this nickname because it learned to survive by drinking blood from the base of feathers on the backs of birds. Tree finches eat insects with the help of their thin, sharp beaks. These and other finches were the inspiration for Darwin's theory that animals could genetically adapt to different conditions over time. Collectively, these birds are known as Darwin's finches. His theory says that all species of plants and animals are in a state of slow and gradual change because they are continually adapting to their physical surroundings. Darwin also applied his theory about adaptation to the best known and possibly most dramatic of the endemic reptiles, the giant tortoise, usually known as the Galapagos tortoise. They are the largest tortoises in the world. often weighing more than 400 pounds, and some up to 600 pounds. They are the symbol of the Galapagos Islands, and also the inspiration for the island's name, since Galapagos means tortoise in Spanish. They take 20 years to reach maturity and can live for a very long time, maybe even 100 to 150 years. Scientists believe that the first tortoises may have drifted to the islands on pieces of floating debris, such as logs. It is also possible that they floated here on their own with the strong currents, and because they can survive for months without food or water. Tourists are able to walk right up to these gentle creatures without frightening them. Their lack of fear and slow movement have made them easy prey to humans who, in the past, captured them for fresh meat on long ocean voyages. There used to be as many as 200,000 of these tortoises, but in modern times, their numbers have dropped to as low as 15 or 16,000. At the Darwin Research Center, they are helping to reverse this decline by protecting small tortoises when they are most vulnerable. Until they are 3 or 4 years old, their shells are very soft, making them easy prey to rats and other predators. By protecting the hatchlings in their younger years, this center can greatly increase their chances of survival. This center also breeds tortoises from each island's race to safeguard their genetic lines. Thanks to these protective efforts, the tortoise population is on the rise again. The next island we made our way to is Floriana. The most remarkable inhabitants on Floriana are the marine iguanas. Over time, they have evolved into the brightly colored reptiles we see today. Here, their bright red leathery skin and long curved claws made us think of them as diving dragons. They're the only sea-going lizard in the world and can be found in only one place, the Galapagos Islands. Remarkably, these marine iguanas can dive more than 35 feet and can remain submerged for up to an hour. They feed on algae found under the water and along the tide lines of the shore, and their short, blunt snouts help them crop the algae as close to the rocks as possible. When they're not diving and feeding, we can see them resting on lava rocks to bask in the sun. Their dark skin helps these cold-blooded animals regulate their body temperature by soaking up heat from the sun. Visitors like us were constantly being entertained by the occasional explosive sneeze. This is an adaptation that helps them get rid of the excess salt from the ocean water. During mating season, their dark colors become even brighter in hopes of attracting a mate. These long curved claws are believed to be another adaptation that helps them hang on to rocks while looking for food, and also to avoid being swept away by the strong currents. Elsewhere on the northern part of Floriana, we visited a noteworthy place called Post Office Bay. In the 18th century, sailors on whaling ships would leave letters in a wooden barrel in this bay as an unofficial mailbox. Sailors on their way home would sort through the barrel and take whatever letters they could deliver once they arrived. The tradition continues today, when visitors like us leave their own addressed postcards in the barrel and, in turn, take mail they can deliver at home. Moving on, next we visited the island of Hispaniola. Greeting us here was this very welcoming Galapagos mockingbird. These birds are a common sight on this and other islands because they are quite friendly, as you can see. Unlike other mockingbirds, they have lost their ability to imitate. They've never needed to. Although they don't display any fear toward humans, there is another animal that many do fear. This is the Galapagos hawk, the apex predator of the islands. Its ranking at the top of the food chain allows it to be fearless. Their keen eyesight helps them to catch and feed on young birds, lizards, small iguanas, rats, and insects. Galapagos hawks are also scavengers, feeding on nearly any dead animal. Here we see yet another example of the tameness of the animals as we watched these waved albatrosses. We felt privileged to witness their long and noisy courtship ritual. We watched them clack their yellow bills, bow their heads, and arch their necks in a very precise routine. Once successfully completed, they mate for life and raise their young together. Continuing on, we were able to meet another group of friendly and curious animals. These are Galapagos sea lions, one of the few mammal species in the Galapagos Islands. As a group, mammals are much less represented in the Galapagos Islands. In fact, when the islands were discovered, there were less than 10 species of mammals, and even then, most of the mammals here are aquatic, just like these sea lions. Sociable and curious, they are a favorite among visitors, and will sometimes swim alongside snorkelers, kayakers, and scuba divers. The next island we're setting our sights on is Isabella. Isabella is the largest island in the Galapagos and makes up more than half of the total land area of the islands. Here we were able to see a lot of the familiar animals we'd already seen, along with some new and notable ones. The equator is not where you would expect to find penguins, since we usually think of them living in cold weather climates. These Galapagos penguins are able to survive here because of the cold water ocean currents like the Humboldt. They are one of the smallest penguin species, standing only at 14 inches tall. Just like their other penguin cousins, they're powerful swimmers, but they can't fly, and even walking is awkward for them. Here we also found the flightless cormorant, one of the most rare bird species in the world. Over time, their swimming skills became more important than their flying ability. Eventually, their wings became shorter, which helped them to swim by reducing friction and underwater drag. With so many nearby fish for them to eat, they had no real need to fly and eventually lost the ability altogether. Since Isabella is one of the youngest islands, volcanoes are still active here. In fact, in the month of May 2015, the volcano known as Wolf Mountain erupted once again. Our trip is now taking us back to the island of Santa Cruz, with a lot left to explore. Unlike their marine relatives, these land iguanas cannot dive or drink salt water. Instead, they rely on fresh water for survival, which is very scarce on any of the islands. So in order to quench their thirst and hunger, they go in search of their favorite food, the fruit of the prickly pear cactus, which has a high water content. In order to chew the fruit's spiky pads, these iguanas' mouths have become very tough over time. Another adaptation. These impressive birds are called frigate birds. They are incredibly large, measuring more than 40 inches from head to tail, and with a wingspan of more than 7 feet across. These long-pointed wings allow them to fly gracefully through the air and cover long distances. Their forked tails can open and close like scissors, helping to navigate the skies with ease and speed. Frigate birds are also notable for these remarkable red throat sacs, which are used to attract females. In the bird world, this is what is known as a mating display. The sacs can be inflated up to the size of a small football in the hope of attracting a mate. These colorful birds are blue-footed boobies, and they too are native to the Galapagos. They are good at fishing for their food and are deep divers. We watch them dive bomb into the water at incredible speeds. Both parents care for the young, each bringing home fish that are found close to shore. They nest in colonies that are close to the ground and can be very entertaining to watch. There are also red-footed boobies. Rather than nesting on the open ground, they nest in bushes or small trees. Rather than diving for their food, they skim the water looking for fish. These are Nazca boobies. Like their blue-footed relatives, they also nest on the ground, but usually only raise one hatchling at a time. Santa Cruz also offers us a glimpse of the volcanic origins of these amazing islands. These tunnels are really lava tubes, channels formed by flowing lava in times long past. These ropey layers are hardened lava that cooled quickly and stopped flowing once encountering the cool ocean water. Santa Cruz is also the island where the human populations of the Galapagos Islands can be found. As with many other environments, human activity is one of the biggest threats to these unique populations. Humans have had a large negative impact on the islands in some major ways. People have introduced dogs, cats, pigs, goats, and rats to the islands. They've developed into feral or wild populations, which create a significant threat to native animals. They're known to eat bird and tortoise eggs as well as their young. They also compete for very scarce sources of water and food on the islands. Secondly, the human population has also skyrocketed on the islands, which also creates threats to the animal populations. Today, 28,000 people call the Galapagos home. They construct buildings and roads and also plow up native plants to farm the land. The government of Ecuador is working to slow this rate of population growth. Ironically, this trend is mostly as a result of the growing tourism industry. For many years, a trip to the Galapagos Island was a rare occurrence. Today, more than 100,000 visitors come to these islands each year. Some people may accidentally bring seeds or tiny insects to the islands, which can threaten the survival of the native species and possibly bring harmful diseases. Thirdly, commercial overfishing continues to pose a threat to the marine ecosystem. Not only is the fish population affected, but birds attracted to the bait on fish hooks can become unintended victims as well. Many efforts are underway to reduce the human impact. For example, certified guides must accompany all groups of visitors to the islands. Visitors are not allowed to either feed or touch the animals. Everyone has to stay on designated trails, and people are not allowed to bring any food or drink to the islands. In other areas, conservation efforts to control the feral population of rats and goats are becoming successful, reducing the threats to native tortoises and iguanas. Wind and solar energy are also being promoted as new power sources. Some island residents are also recycling the oil that is used by the fishing and tourism industries. As a result of these collective efforts, the Galapagos are one of the best preserved archipelagos in the world. Some scientists have called them a living laboratory of evolution. Even today, new creatures continue to be discovered on land and in the surrounding ocean waters. All too soon, it was time to leave these enchanted islands. Throughout our departure, I reflected back on this amazing adventure. These unique and vulnerable animals are facing so many challenges to their fragile existence. The only thing keeping them from harm's way is the determination of the government to preserve this natural treasure. It will certainly take a great deal of courage and determination to protect this UNESCO World Heritage Site. Overall, they're considered an enormous treasure in a world faced with daily extinction of unique plants and animals. With continued care, this natural treasure will remain a shining example of preservation for the rest of the world to follow. Thanks for coming along on our visit to the Galapagos Islands. Join us again for more exciting destinations.
We want to thank you for joining us on that trip. There were a lot of different things to see, a lot of different animals, and I love nature, so that was a lot of fun for me. We enjoy spending this new form of community with you, and we hope you will join us next time for another episode of Virtual Field Trips with Josh. See you then.